Hello and welcome to today's Roads and Bridges webcast. Our topic this afternoon is cutting the total cost of asset ownership and transportation, dive into Asset Lifecycle Management, sponsored by Trimble. I'm Gavin Jenkins, Senior Managing Editor for Roads and Bridges, and I will be moderating today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to explain how you can participate in today's presentation. First, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, simply type your issue into the Ask a Question box, and a member of our team will assist you. You can also click on the question mark help button in the upper right corner of the screen. Additionally, we welcome your questions during today's event. We will answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session that will follow the main presentation, but please feel free to send in your questions at any time. To do so, once again, simply type your questions into the Ask a Question box and click on the Send button. Also, please be aware that today's session is being recorded and we will have it available on the Roads and Bridges website within the next week. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. Now, let's meet today's speakers. Doug Reichard, a 15-year veteran of the AECO technology business, is Director of Industry Strategy for State Federal Government at Trimble, and is an industry thought leader for digital transformation in all forms of transportation and infrastructure. Scott Yates is the Scott Yates is the Director of Digital Transformation in the Strategic Consulting Group at Woolpert. He focuses on accelerating client digital transformation and data interoperability in support of asset management across the entire asset life cycle. Now, let me turn things over to our presenters, starting with Scott, who will correct all of my pronunciations, and he will kick off today's event. The floor is yours, Scott.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That was quite a mouthful, wasn't it? I'm super excited to be here today to talk about a subject that I'm very passionate about. As was stated in the intro, my name's Scott Yates. I'm a director in the Strategic Consulting Group at Woolpert. I've been implementing enterprise asset management systems for over 20 years, but more recently, I've been focused on digital transformation across the entire asset lifecycle, and in particular, aligning organizations and technologies to support full asset lifecycle management. So to that end, I'm going to be introducing some concepts and some impacts related to asset lifecycle management, and then introducing Doug Reichard to share some exciting innovative solutions that Trimble has developed to support asset lifecycle management. So let's go ahead and jump in. So asset lifecycle management is defined as a strategic approach to asset management that involves considering impacts to the entire asset lifecycle when making decisions within any individual phase of the asset lifecycle. Now, one of the core concepts in ALM is total cost of ownership, TCO. And the primary tenet of the philosophy could be summarized as trying to minimize the total cost of ownership required to meet specific performance requirements or organizational goals. Now, this concept seems pretty intuitive, but it's not how organizations traditionally behave. The asset life cycle is long, and there are very different stakeholders with very different motivations and contractual obligations and goals at each stage. Now, all of these individuals, both internal and external to an owner organization, are primarily measured on how they behave within their phase. This leads to the pursuit of local optimums at the expense of overall optimization. So, for example, we might minimize construction cost without regard for its impact on increasing operational costs down the road. So quite literally, our traditional procurement and delivery processes are at odds with asset lifecycle management. Despite 75% of an asset's total cost of ownership being incurred in the operations and maintenance phase, the truth is that the majority of factors that will drive TCO for an asset or system or facility are locked in during planning, design, and construction. It's very difficult to move the needle once the asset has been handed over to the owner or operator. Now, because of this, one of the first principles of asset lifecycle management is bringing asset management into the discussion early in the planning and design and construction phases. to add total cost of ownership as a consideration in all the decisions that are made. Now, the overall paradigm shift here is about implementing true asset portfolio management versus just managing individual physical assets. At Woolpert, we've seen successful adoption of asset lifecycle management with a focus on total cost of ownership deliver as much as 40% savings in total cost of ownership. Very impactful. Another way to look at this is to assume that once you've defined your specific performance requirements for an asset, system, or facility, there is an absolutely perfect sequence of decisions through planning, design, construction, and operations that results in the lowest possible total cost of ownership without sacrificing any of your performance requirements. This is the theoretical perfect asset management plan. Now, working off that assumption, any suboptimal decision made along the way will have some negative effect on one or more of the factors that drive total cost of ownership. Typically, this is in sustainability, in resiliency, or in maintainability. Now, these suboptimal decisions aren't necessarily huge forks in the road that are incredibly obvious. They are literally thousands of individual decisions that take place day in and day out throughout the normal course of planning, designing, constructing, and operating an asset system or facility. And they have a cumulative effect on total cost of ownership. As an example, I once worked with a mass transit organization, which will remain nameless today, that made a decision to implement non-standard rail gauge sizes in response to a wind study that was done during the planning phase. Now, that decision had the impact of ensuring that the system would always require custom parts and significantly limit procurement options later in the system's life cycle. In fact, it reached a point 30 years later when I was involved with this customer where there was literally only one company still willing to produce the parts they needed, and they were basically able to set their own price for those parts. Now, this may be an extreme example, but the decisions can be as minuscule as approving a design that puts an element that needs to be inspected regularly in a location that requires special equipment to get to it. So the goal for an organization in relation to asset management should be to put an infrastructure in place. This is people, processes, systems, and data that puts everyone in the best possible position to make the best possible decision in terms of total cost of ownership and performance standards at every step of the way as you proceed through the asset lifecycle. Now, these asset lifecycle management concepts are not new. There was a National Academy study as far back as 1991 titled Pay Now or Pay Later that highlights the benefits of an asset lifecycle management TCO-based approach. However, even as that report states, implementing these philosophies has been challenging due to technology, data processing power, data sharing capabilities, et cetera. We just did not have the technology to effectively implement the workflows required to adopt a true asset lifecycle management approach. But that is most certainly changing now. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Doug Reichert from Trimble to talk about how they are embracing this philosophy with their latest portfolio of offerings. Go ahead, Doug, take it away.
Right on, man. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. I love doing these presentations with you, my friend. We complete each other's sentences. It's kind of fun. You know, Scott touched on a lot of things that we're gonna touch on with some of the Trimble technology, kind of tying solutions to technology solutions to some of the things that Scott has mentioned and that Woolpert really excels at as a consultant to deliver value for their customers. So, you know, I'm going to lay it on a little thick here and say, look, at the end of the day, the bottom line on top is organizations that employ asset lifecycle management technology solutions save as much as 40% on the total cost of their assets. Now, you heard it from Scott too, right? They've done that and they've documented it. Yes, it's as much as, right? We know that for something like pavement for a Department of Transportation, which is usually a very large component of their capital budget or their operational budget, that if we could save you 2% on that, it's a huge value. It's a massive number and it's a really big value. And will you do this with every asset? No. But what we're trying to do is to kind of shock the world a little bit into thinking that, you know, maybe we should be looking at doing things differently. And the concept of total cost of ownership is a really good approach to consider when doing that. So if we look at the current state, on the left, you've got your, we'll call it digital project delivery, or your CapEx side of the house. On the right, you have your enterprise asset management, which is your operate and maintain world on the OpEx or operational side of the house. One of the challenges in every agency that we talk to, like when we were looking as Trimble at our go-to-market and how we were going to address asset lifecycle management and what were the challenges that the agencies faced, et cetera, we talked to many agencies, I mean, in excess of 25, and not one of them didn't admit or share the feedback that, yeah, OpEx and CapEx barely talk. In fact, at one of the largest agencies we met with, the head of the OpEx really didn't know the head of CapEx. So it was very much separate worlds, living separate lives with separate budgets. And the stuff in the middle there, consider that the information hub, right? You've got everything from shared file drives for file-based workflows or file storage. You got a document management system. You could have SharePoint. You could have paper. There's lots and lots of paper at all agencies. And then you've got native file applications such as design software that might, also be housing key pieces of data that would be valuable. And those lines, the vertical lines on that slide, they might as well be 100-foot tall walls made of granite and covered with hot oil. Because if there's nothing that's pushing CapEx and OpEx to be working together and talking to each other, and nothing connecting them, therein lies one of the problems, right? And so let's pause it for a minute on how that actually plays out. So if we have this, where we've got the separation between CapEx and OpEx and nothing tying them together, you've got a graph over here that basically shows what Scott described, being like after the asset has been delivered, 75% of the actual costs are incurred for the life cycle, the total cost of that asset. And it's cumulative, right? You expect to see a vertical trend here. But what's happening is this. I have to be careful how I say this, but people that have been doing these jobs have been using the same processes for doing these jobs of managing and maintaining assets and creating capital programs, have been doing it the same way for a long time. Maybe it's been 15 years, 20 years. And that also means that the technology that they're using, and this is true at most agencies, is antiquated. Or at best, it's modern. At worst, it's not connected. It's not interoperable. And those two bubbles at the top are the driving factor behind what determines the total cost of ownership. And when that is the case, it's going to increase it. So let's consider for a minute what's possible. I replaced those multiple bubbles in the middle here with a connected data environment, just as kind of to allude a little bit to what's coming, right? When these two sides of the house don't talk, a lot of challenges. I mean, I don't need to explain this to most of the people on this meeting. You live this on a daily basis. But is it discussed? Is there somebody in the agency that's actually trying to make this happen? I'll use one of my favorite examples is a big bridge in the West that is 75 years old. It gets a ton of traffic every day. And every 3 to 4 years, they have to close down half the bridge and cut away a section of the bridge just to be able to inspect something. Let that sink in for a minute. And I know that there are varying versions of that all over this country, larger or even smaller, or even larger or smaller. But imagine what's possible if the people that are designing the replacement for that bridge were actually working with the people that had maintained that bridge and inviting comment, inviting their input. And then the conversation around, wow, what if we could design this, include elements of maintainability in the design, designing for maintainability. It's an incredible concept, right? And it's something we all aspire to. So the only way that that's going to ever happen is if you have something in the middle that allows the data, starting in as early as an environmental impact study, being able to move from stage to stage to stage through a connected data environment, given the context of a project and the context of a model, to inform enterprise asset management. I mean, Scott said it more eloquently than I'm about to say it, but at the end of the day, our ability now through this type of a system to analyze more data and make more informed decisions will have a dramatic effect on total cost of ownership. So what does that mean? You've seen this graph before. If we have this, we have this. Let's let total cost of ownership actually be the thing that drives the people, the processes, and the technology and systems that are used. When we do that, we have an opportunity to make some pretty dramatic changes in our capital programs. And I really appreciate the way Scott said the importance and impact of suboptimal decisions earlier in the process, right? During design or pre-design, or it could be just conceptual design. How those things accumulate over time so that once the asset's been constructed, it's hard to change it. But if we flip the script and allow the total cost of ownership to be the guiding factor in what we do, we can make big changes. As we've proven, and as the studies that we're citing prove, we can help you reduce the total cost of ownership of your assets, not by a little, but by a lot. So think about that for a moment as an asset manager for an agency now. If you were able to lower your total cost of ownership of your pavement, if you could reduce the expenditures on your pavement by even a percentage point, it's a massive savings. And it goes across the board. It could be components. It could be saving on quantities. There's a lot of different ways to do this, right? When you talk about something as complicated and complex as a bridge, optimizing rebar, designing rebar into a bridge, there's just a laundry list of things that I could go on for too much time that we don't have in this venue. But just to give like one specific example, something like a warranty claim on a component. In this case, you see this poor gentleman standing there kind of cursing himself because he's got all these records and can't get to the money that he could get to if he could just make the claim on that warranty. And it's not a small amount. I mean, there's only 30% of the actual warranties get claimed. That's one example. Like there's a transportation agency I worked with where they finished a design of a major railway extension for light rail. And at the end of the project, they delivered 2.5 containers of paper containers filled with banker boxes filled with paper as-builts. And they had a department of 20 plus people that will spend the next 2.5 years entering the information manually from those drawings into in this case, it was a work order management system. And think about the costs and the risks and the liabilities that just compound when people are manually transposing data. Significant impact there. So what is it? How do we take this and kind of put this in the context of an agency? This slide shows what we call a digital maturity model. Most of the agencies that we're working with over here, you're generally going to be in the one category. There are agencies that are more advanced that are getting into the twos where we're utilizing BIM and BIM data to make better decisions early in the process. The challenge comes when that data never makes it to construction or they don't have constructible models. When we get to the point where we're talking a life cycle platform, right, this is where we aspire to be. We're blessed to have a great customer, which is basically the Norwegian Road and Rail Authority, that is doing this now. And here's one of the big takeaways I want to make clear to everybody on this. They're doing this now. They're utilizing a lot of Trimble technology as the connected data environment, in this case, behind it. but they have over 1,800 models for their entire road and rail network. And it's all being done digitally, the management and maintenance of those assets. But here's the key. It's not just Trimble applications. It's 30 other applications that are interoperable via common data standards through a connected data environment that make what seems impossible possible. They make bridges that are miles long with no plan sets, and they reduce the cost of change in those projects as much as like 65%. You know, it's a place for us to aspire to be here in North America, but we can get there. And here's another thing I want to make really clear is we're not going to show up with a bunch of technology and flick it at you and say, here, buy all this stuff and you're on the road. The way that we do this successfully is we show up with technology that can get you on a path and accelerate your digital transformation. You'll get there faster. And when we're lucky enough to partner up with the likes of a Woolpert who are like-minded in this approach for total cost of ownership, we will have and have had bona fide success in doing this. And then when we get just to the last one here, to the predictive platform in the category 4, when you get to the point where you're not a reactive maintenance system and you're a predictive maintenance system and you're predicting when assets fail, you can add like another 30% reduction in total cost of ownership on top of the 40%. So there's a lot of motivation here for us to get to these places. When we work together, we can do it. And Trimble has unique circumstances in that we have the right solutions at the right time that are fully interoperable, non-proprietary, and are ready to work now. So with that, I will cut to the thank you slide. Scott and I's email address is there. We would love to hear from any and all of you, and very much appreciate your time.
All right. Well, thank you so much to the two of you. Such an interesting presentation, as always, from Trimble. Now, a few of you have already submitted questions, so we're going to jump right in. If you'd like to submit a question, simply type your question into the Ask a Question box and hit the send button. So, question number 1. Given the influence of design firms in government agencies, how do you recommend establishing data standards earlier in the project lifecycle and workflow, particularly during the design stage, potentially into the contract or bid process? And how can these standards be linked with the constructible model during the construction phase and used to capture as-built data?
That's a great question. I love when a question essentially answers itself. That's always fantastic, because the question itself kind of presents the solution to the question being posed. Yeah, I mean, it is all about that data standards. It's not the sexiest answer. You know, it's funny, for all of the webinars and presentations and discussions I get involved in with sexy things like digital twins, the majority of my work is in data standards and helping organizations define their data standards and their data governance and their data flows across their various departments. I mean, that is absolutely where the rubber hits the road and what allows the technologies to work to enable the organization. And so it is about establishing organizational standards. And as you do that, I highly recommend adopting industry-wide open standards. So things like IFC, COBE, IDS, because if you leverage those industry-wide open standards, you're in a much better position to work with the various pieces of software that different vendors are going to bring to the table. But it is key to have these established before your project starts. In fact, these standards should be attached to the RFPs that are going out to vendors, so everyone is clear from day one what their responsibility is from a digital asset data deliverable, in addition to the actual physical asset system facility they're looking to deliver. And the first thing I always get back when I say that is, well, they're going to charge me for it. Yes, they are. You're going to pay for it, okay? But you need to buy it. you need to pay for it, because that is the cheapest it's ever going to be. If you do not define your standards and buy that data up front, you're going to be buying it throughout the life cycle of that asset, right? You're either going to be paying a firm like mine to come in and go collect the actual data that you do need in the format you do need for your processes and systems to work, or your own people are going to be continuously looking for that data throughout the life cycle of the asset. So every time they get assigned to do something, whether it's a project, work order, inspection, whatever related to that asset, they're going to re-incur that effort to go find the information that they need. So, yes, you are buying this now as a part of your project, but it's necessary, it's cheap, and it drives cost savings. It's the cheapest it's going to get, and it drives cost savings later. And again, main message there is utilize open standards. There's even open standards out there for capturing your data and design specifications that can be automatically run against your BIM models to be able to point out where you're deficient. And these are tools that you can give. So once you define that, these are tools that you can actually give to your vendors and contractors so that they can QA, QC, make sure they're meeting your standard before they even hand you the deliverable.
Yeah, just an extension of that. That was a great answer, Scott. Thank you. You're also going to pay for it in rework. I mean, if your standards aren't set early in the project, and the problem is just going to compound throughout the project. So that's one thing. And why redo? Right now, the departments of transportation basically have 50 plus different standards. Why have that? If the goal is if you utilize the open data standards like IFC 4.3 as an example, you don't have to you make the consultant's job easier, you make the technology provider's job easier, and you make your own people's job easier. And this isn't just me saying it, like this is Federal Highways and AASHTO guidance about using open data standards for like IFC 4.3. So it's such an important thing to point out. And the other thing I think is the mention about design firms and the influence of design firms. There are a lot of influences from design firms, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, my ask of the design firms is, let's work together on leveraging open data standards so that we can deliver value-added services together, like what we do with Woolpert, for the agencies. Things that are going to move the needle, using interoperable solutions, non-proprietary solutions, ones that are already created and ready to integrate with existing platforms for design, construct, and operate and maintain. Let's do that, because when we start doing that and we're rowing in the same direction, we're only going to be doing better work and better services for our customers. So I'll leave it there.
All right, well, let's jump to the next question. You mentioned that an ALM approach can save up to 40% on total cost of ownership. Where does that number come from, and where are the cost savings specifically?
Yeah, and so this is a number we've developed through our experience at Woolpert. So, I mean, we've witnessed this firsthand, and a key element to that is up to 40%. You're not going to see 40% savings absolutely everywhere across the board, but we have seen very real scenarios where we've achieved that type of savings. And you get to that number by stacking benefits, right? So when I was talking earlier, I had mentioned some of the major areas that have effect on TCO. Sustainability, right? So if we are able to make decisions that increase asset life, decrease power consumption, so things last longer, use less power, have less cost to operate, that's going to bring your TCO cost down. When we look at resiliency, so the ability of the asset, system, facility, whatever it is, to withstand a range of events or extreme conditions that could occur in the life cycle of the asset. That's by being prepared for those things and better design decisions. We bring that total cost of ownership down. And then a huge one, which I think is just underutilized and undervalued in planning design, is maintainability. Right? There are some very simple and easy decisions that can be made during planning and design that don't have an effect on ultimately the performance requirements of the asset system or facility or the organization's objectives, that can make that thing easier to maintain, either through material selection, part selection, location of the asset. These are all things, these are all areas where we can drive those operations costs down. So when you start to look at the thousands of decisions that are made across planning, design, and construction, and you take an approach where you evaluate those decisions as best you can from within these categories, those small decisions which have a little bit of impact start to stack, and they result in a huge impact. And they are not decisions that can be made again in the asset lifecycle. That's really the key component. Is once the asset system or facility is handed over to the group that's maintaining it, there's only so much. They can use reliability centered maintenance. They can try and optimize their work processes to squeeze out a little bit of savings, but they're literally now working on the fractions of a % of savings that they're trying to squeeze out, where the big decisions that locked in much larger savings have already been made, and they don't have the ability to affect that. So the number comes from stacking the benefits that we can see in each one of these areas: sustainability, resiliency, and maintainability, as you go through the thousands of design decisions or other decisions that are made on a project.
Yeah, it goes back to the importance of being able to have access to and make use of massive amounts of data that, for the most part, on construction projects, never make it to the as-built. And that explains, at least in my eyes, how one of the main ways that it's cumulative. Less than 10% of the data per stage actually makes it from stage to stage to stage through a construction project. And when we can facilitate, it's one thing to have the data, but if it lives in dark closets, I call it dark data, and you can't see it, do anything with it because it doesn't have any context. Maybe it's not geolocated. Like there's no connectivity to something. There's no context to it, like a project or a model. When we can bring data along the journey and improve its usability so that it's where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, in the format it needs, in the way that it needs to be there to be consumed and actioned, that's where we can make a huge difference in this process. I'm going to stop because I think we're over time.
Oh, so you don't want to answer one more? You think should we wrap it up?
I would love to keep going, my friend. I just don't want to be. I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
Okay. All right. Well, we will wrap it up there. And for those questions we didn't have time to answer, we'll be getting back to you via email. That concludes today's webcast. On behalf of Roads and Bridges, I'd like to thank Scott and Doug for their fascinating presentation. I'd also like to thank Trimble for sponsoring today's event. And of course, all of you for joining. Have a great rest of your day.